Elon Musk walked into the hospital lobby wearing a red MAGA hat, the words bright against the clean white walls. The sight triggered murmurs among staff and patients. To Sarah Knight, the hospital manager, the scene felt like a ticking time bomb. She prided herself on fostering a welcoming environment in her hospital, but this felt provocative. Sarah was juggling 3 emergencies at once: a staff shortage in the ER, a media inquiry about a patient lawsuit, and a pressing board report. Then she spotted the man in the hat moving toward the elevators. Something about his demeanor irked her. Was he here to cause a scene? She dropped the phone mid-call, striding toward him with purpose. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice firm but controlled. "Can I help you with something?" The man turned, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Looking for the executive offices," he replied. Sarah's pulse quickened. This wasn't someone she recognized. No VIP badge, no prior announcement. "Are you a guest of one of our executives?" she pressed. "No, but I might own a stake in their time," he said cryptically. Her frustration flared. A group of patients nearby whispered among themselves, their disapproval evident. One young nurse gave her a pleading look, silently begging for intervention. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Sarah said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Your presence here is making people uncomfortable." The man raised an eyebrow. "Because of my hat?" "Because of what it represents," she replied without hesitation. "Interesting," he said, his smirk widening. "But I think I'll stay." She signaled to security, her patience worn thin. 2 guards approached, and after a brief but charged exchange, they escorted the man out. As he reached the exit, he turned back and said, "You might want to check who you're throwing out next time." The words hung in the air like a challenge, but Sarah dismissed them. She had more pressing matters. By mid-afternoon, Sarah was summoned to an urgent board meeting. Her stomach churned. She had no idea what the meeting was about but knew better than to expect good news. As she entered the sleek conference room, every executive was already seated, their faces a mix of tension and unease. "Sarah, please take a seat," the chairman said gravely. She obliged, her mind racing. "Earlier today," the chairman began, "a significant incident occurred in our lobby. A man was removed from the premises by your directive." "Yes," Sarah said, her voice steady. "He was causing a disturbance." The chairman exchanged glances with the others before continuing. "That man was Elon Musk." Sarah froze. "Excuse me? Elon Musk?" he repeated. "The majority stakeholder in this hospital. He recently acquired a controlling interest through a private investment." Her breath caught in her throat. The room tilted slightly as the weight of the revelation settled in. The man she'd thrown out wasn't just anyone, he was her boss. "Musk is unconventional," the chairman added. "But he's deeply invested in this hospital's future. He was here today to observe operations and discuss changes." Sarah's cheeks burned with a mix of embarrassment and dread. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," the chairman cut her off. "Musk has requested a meeting with you tomorrow. I suggest you prepare yourself." As the meeting adjourned, Sarah's thoughts spiraled. She replayed the encounter in her mind, realizing how she'd let her assumptions dictate her actions. But there was no time for self-pity. She had to face the consequences. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the hospital's executive suite, her mind still racing with the shock of yesterday's events. She had spent hours agonizing over what went wrong, questioning her decision-making, and anticipating what Musk might say to her. The weight of responsibility was heavy on her shoulders, but there was no turning back now. As she walked into the conference room, Elon Musk was already seated at the head of the table. His presence, despite the casualness of his attire, commanded immediate attention. The faint hint of his trademark confidence was palpable, even in the simple black t-shirt and jeans he wore. He wasn't here to play games. He wasn't here for small talk. Sarah sat down across from him, trying to steady her nerves. She had to stay calm, to present herself as a leader. But she couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling that hung in the air. Musk leaned forward, his eyes sharp, as if measuring her. "So, we need to have a conversation about what happened yesterday," he began, his voice low but direct. "I understand your position, Sarah, but the way you handled it wasn't ideal." Sarah swallowed. "I'm sorry, Elon. I should have asked more questions before taking action. But when I saw someone causing a disturbance, I reacted." "By kicking me out?" Musk's tone was dry, but there was no anger in it. "You didn't even know who I was." She nodded, the embarrassment rising again. "I didn't. And for that, I am truly sorry. It was wrong, and I should have handled it differently." He paused for a moment, allowing the silence to stretch between them. Then, to her surprise, he leaned back in his chair and let out a sigh. "Let's put that behind us for now. It's not about me, anyway. It's about the hospital and what we're doing here." Sarah blinked. "Excuse me? You see, Sarah, this is a place of healing, right?" Musk said. "But it's also a place where real change can happen. I didn't just buy into this hospital because of the potential for profit. I bought it because it has the opportunity to become a beacon of transformation." "Transformation?" she repeated, confused. "Yeah," Musk said. "You and your team have been doing good work, but this place is still living in the past in a lot of ways. We can't be stuck in old thinking when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and how we treat one another. I know it's uncomfortable, but it's time to make some big changes." Sarah frowned. She didn't understand what he meant. "What changes are you talking about?" "We're going to overhaul the way we do things," Musk said, his voice steady and sure. "Diversity training isn't just about having an annual workshop. It's going to be ongoing, embedded in our culture. We need to foster an environment where people from all backgrounds feel included, where no one feels excluded based on their race, gender, or beliefs." She felt the weight of his words. She had always supported diversity, but his words hit her differently now. She thought about the staff, the patients, the way people from different walks of life were treated here. She had always strived to do her best, but this felt like something far greater than just implementing a few initiatives. This was about changing the hospital's DNA. "I'll be honest with you, Sarah," Musk continued. "I'm not here to just make cosmetic changes. I want results. Real impact. That means starting at the top, starting with you." The statement hit her like a ton of bricks. "You want me to change?" she asked, the words almost feeling like a challenge. "You've got the potential," Musk replied. "But you've also got your biases, like everyone does. No one's perfect. But you need to confront them. Head on. I can't lead this charge if you're not willing to be a part of it." Sarah took a deep breath. She had always believed in leading by example, but now, the stakes felt higher than ever. Her mistake yesterday had exposed a blind spot she didn't know she had. But it also opened a door for growth. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "I'm ready to make changes. For this hospital. For the people who work here and the people we serve." Musk smiled slightly. "That's what I like to hear." He stood up and motioned for Sarah to follow him. "We're going to start by addressing the leadership team. I need you to help me get everyone on board with this shift. There's going to be resistance. It's inevitable. But we can't afford to be afraid of it." She followed him through the halls, already preparing herself for the difficult conversations ahead. Musk wasn't just challenging her actions from yesterday. He was challenging her worldview. She would need to be stronger, more self-aware, more resilient than she had ever been. "I'll set up the first meeting," Sarah said, her voice steady. "And we'll go from there. You're going to have to be tough," Musk said, his tone serious. "This isn't going to be easy. But if we're going to leave a legacy of change, it starts with you. Are you up for it?" Sarah paused for a moment, then nodded firmly. "I am." As they walked to the meeting room, Sarah realized that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the turning point she needed, not just for the hospital, but for herself as well. Sarah stood before the leadership team, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was filled with the top executives of the hospital, their expressions ranging from skeptical to downright hostile. They were not yet convinced by Musk's vision for the future, and Sarah had her work cut out for her. "Thank you for gathering," she began, her voice steady but firm. "Today is the beginning of something new. And it starts with us. As you know, we're facing some significant changes, but they are necessary to push this hospital forward." She paused, scanning the room. The weight of their stares felt heavy. She knew they weren't going to make this easy. The old guard wasn't quick to embrace change, especially the kind that Musk was pushing for. One of the senior board members, Tom, raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are we changing, Sarah? We've had diversity initiatives in place for years. Why are we being asked to fix something that isn't broken?" Sarah took a breath. She'd anticipated this pushback. "Tom, with all due respect, the initiatives we've put in place haven't done enough. We've focused on the surface level, diversity training, annual workshops, but we haven't created an environment where people of all backgrounds feel truly included. We haven't examined our biases or our own behaviors. We've been comfortable with the status quo, and that needs to change." Musk's words echoed in her mind. This was bigger than just adding more diversity training. It was about dismantling the structures that perpetuated prejudice and exclusion, something she hadn't fully grasped until now. "We need to transform this hospital into a place where every patient and employee, regardless of their race, gender, or background, feels like they belong," Sarah continued. "This is about more than just policies. It's about a culture shift." Another member of the team, Sarah's right-hand director, Lisa, crossed her arms and looked skeptical. "A culture shift? That sounds like a massive undertaking. How do you expect us to pull that off without alienating staff?" "I don't expect it to be easy," Sarah replied. "But it's the right thing to do. We have a responsibility to lead, to set an example, and to ensure that every individual in this organization feels valued. And that starts with us." She could feel the tension in the room. No one was jumping to support her, and she could tell they were still trying to wrap their heads around what Musk's vision meant for them personally. The word, accountability, hung in the air, but Sarah knew they weren't ready to embrace it yet. "I know you all care about this hospital," she said, looking each person in the eye. "But this isn't just about making us look good on paper. It's about being a hospital that people want to be a part of. A place where everyone, regardless of their background or political views, feels respected. And right now, we're not there." There was silence. No one spoke. The room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for someone to make the first move. Sarah's resolve hardened. She couldn't back down now. "I know this will be uncomfortable," she added, her voice calm but firm. "But it's our job to lead by example. To foster a culture of empathy and inclusivity. We can't be afraid of discomfort because that's where growth happens." Finally, Musk spoke up from the back of the room. "Sarah's right. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be fast. But if we're going to have a real impact, we need to be willing to challenge ourselves, to make mistakes, and to learn. We need to embrace accountability." There was a murmur in the room. It wasn't exactly an endorsement, but it wasn't a rejection either. Sarah seized the moment. "We'll start with leadership," she said. "We need to look at how we've been leading, what we've been tolerating, and where we've fallen short. This isn't just about the staff or the patients, it's about us. If we can't hold ourselves accountable, how can we expect anyone else to?" Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "So, what exactly are you asking for?" "I'm asking for all of us to examine our actions, our biases, and our beliefs," Sarah said. "We'll start with mandatory training, real training, not just a lecture. And then we'll work on creating systems that make sure these principles are woven into everything we do here. From hiring to patient care to leadership development. This will require ongoing effort." There was still some resistance in the room, but Sarah pressed on. She had no choice but to be persistent. "The goal is to create a hospital that truly represents its community," Sarah continued. "One where patients don't feel judged based on their appearance, background, or beliefs. Where our staff feels supported and safe to speak up. It's time to make our values clear and tangible. It's time to take a hard look at ourselves and ask if we're doing enough. The silence that followed felt like an eternity, but then, Lisa spoke again. It's going to be hard, Sarah. I don't think anyone here doubts that. But if you think this is something worth fighting for, then I'll follow your lead. Musk gave a slight nod, his approval subtle but unmistakable. I'm in too, Tom said, his voice quieter than before. But this can't just be a directive from the top down. We need to involve everyone. Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her. This wasn't going to be a quick fix, but at least the conversation had started. At least they were on the path toward change. We'll involve everyone, Sarah agreed. This isn't just for us to decide. We need input from all levels, staff, patients, everyone. We'll make sure their voices are heard. There was still a long way to go, but the foundation had been laid. Sarah knew this wouldn't be easy. It would take time, effort, and plenty of setbacks. But it was the right thing to do. She had to believe that. And with Musk's backing, they might just be able to make it happen. As the meeting came to a close, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just the hospital manager anymore. She was a leader tasked with reshaping an institution. It wouldn't be simple, but she was ready for the challenge. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Sarah. What started as a small group of hesitant leaders slowly transformed into a powerful, collaborative team united by a single goal: to overhaul the hospital's culture. Despite initial pushback and doubts, the hospital began to see the first signs of a transformation. Sarah had always been a firm believer in progress, but now, more than ever, she was reminded that change didn't happen overnight. It was a constant, gradual process, often uncomfortable but necessary. As she walked through the halls each day, she could feel the weight of her decisions. People were watching her, watching to see if she could follow through on the promises she'd made. One of the most challenging parts of the process was confronting the hospital's long-standing biases. Prejudices, though not always overt, had taken root in the way things were done. From hiring practices to patient interactions, there were subtle but significant biases embedded in every corner of the hospital. Sarah had been shocked to realize just how pervasive they were, but she also understood that addressing them was the key to real change. In one of the hospital's leadership meetings, Sarah presented the first step in their strategy: a comprehensive audit of all hiring practices. The room fell silent as she outlined the need to review recruitment processes, job descriptions, and even how interviews were conducted. For many, this felt like a direct challenge to the way they'd always done things. We need to ensure that our hiring practices are inclusive, Sarah said, her voice steady. That means removing biases from job descriptions, expanding our pool of candidates, and making sure we're offering equal opportunities to everyone. A few of the senior managers in the room exchanged glances. One of them, Greg, a longtime director of HR, cleared his throat. This sounds a little too much like overhauling everything. Are we really sure we want to change this much? Isn't it working as is? Sarah's expression didn't waver. It's not working. If it were, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We're not just looking to fill positions. We're looking to create an environment where everyone feels welcome and valued, regardless of background. Elon Musk, who had been observing the discussion with a quiet intensity, spoke up. What Sarah's saying is that inclusion isn't just a buzzword. It's about action. This audit is just the beginning. If we don't make this a priority, we'll continue to fall short of our potential. The room shifted. It wasn't that the leadership team didn't understand the need for diversity, but confronting their own biases was a difficult and often uncomfortable process. For many, it felt like admitting that they had been blind to issues that had been right under their noses for years. But Musk's words had a certain gravity that demanded attention, and one by one, the executives nodded in agreement. We'll get the audit started, Greg said, though his tone was still uncertain. But we'll need time. Sarah nodded. We'll give it the time it needs. But we'll also need full transparency throughout the process. This can't just be another box we check off. This has to be real, lasting change. The work was tedious but essential. Over the next few months, the audit revealed startling disparities. Some positions had been filled with candidates who weren't necessarily the most qualified but fit a certain mold. The selection process had been biased towards certain backgrounds, inadvertently shutting out talented individuals from underrepresented groups. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but Sarah knew it was the only way forward. The audit wasn't just about identifying the flaws. It was about changing the mindset that had allowed them to persist. The real work, Sarah realized, was about breaking the cycle of complacency and replacing it with a culture of constant reflection and improvement. As Sarah and her team began implementing the recommendations from the audit, the hospital began to show early signs of transformation. Hiring managers began to prioritize skills and qualifications over familiarity or unconscious bias. A new, diverse group of employees was brought on board, and for the first time in years, there was a noticeable shift in the hospital's culture. More voices, more perspectives, and more ideas were entering the conversation. But the work wasn't done. Sarah was acutely aware that true transformation wouldn't happen just through hiring practices. They needed to change the way staff interacted with each other, the way patients were treated, and the way leadership approached accountability. She introduced mandatory diversity and inclusion workshops for all staff, something beyond the usual one-day seminars. These workshops would be ongoing, giving employees tools to examine their own biases and challenges in real time. However, the push for accountability was met with resistance. In one meeting, Sarah addressed a growing issue. A few senior doctors had expressed frustration with the changes and were openly skeptical about the diversity and inclusion efforts. "Sarah, we've been doing this job for decades. We don't need a lecture on inclusivity. We've always treated our patients with respect," one of them, Dr. Williams, said curtly. Sarah didn't flinch. "It's not about treating patients with respect. It's about recognizing that our biases are affecting our judgment. It's about ensuring that everyone has equal access to care, no matter where they come from or what they look like." Another doctor, Dr. Patel, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "She's right. We can't pretend like everything is fine just because we think it's fine. We need to examine our actions, even the ones we don't notice. This is about providing the best care to everyone, not just the ones we're comfortable with." Dr. Williams' expression softened, but he still wasn't entirely convinced. "But where do we draw the line? At what point does it become too much?" "That's the point," Sarah said. "There is no too much. It's about constantly evaluating our behavior and looking for areas where we can improve. That's how we create a culture of excellence." As the weeks went on, Sarah could see subtle shifts taking place. Conversations were changing. Staff were beginning to speak up more. They were discussing biases, inequalities, and ways to address them openly. The hospital's leadership was no longer just issuing directives. They were engaged, actively participating in the change they were working toward. But even with all the progress, Sarah knew that transformation wasn't just about making a few changes. It was about changing the way people thought, the way they approached each other, and the way they led. It was about fostering a culture of inclusion, empathy, and continuous growth. It would take years, not months, for the full impact to be felt. And as the hospital's culture began to shift, Sarah realized that the lessons she was learning weren't just for the hospital. They were for her own growth as a leader. The work was hard. The road was long. But with each step, she was becoming the leader she had always wanted to be. And she knew that, in the end, it would be worth it. The transformation Sarah had envisioned for the hospital was not without its obstacles. Despite the progress that had been made, there were moments when the resistance felt insurmountable. Not everyone was on board with the changes she and Elon Musk had pushed for, and some individuals continued to dig in their heels, unwilling to accept the need for such a radical shift. One of the most significant challenges came when a group of employees from the more senior ranks began to openly question the hospital's diversity initiatives. They had grown accustomed to the old ways, where people of similar backgrounds were promoted, and where biases were left unchallenged. It wasn't that they were malicious, it was simply that they hadn't known any other way of doing things. And now, with the pressure mounting, they found themselves at a crossroads. During a particularly tense staff meeting, Sarah addressed the concerns directly. "I know that these changes have been difficult," she began, her voice calm but firm. "I know that many of you feel like the hospital is going in a direction that you're not entirely comfortable with. But I need to remind you that this is not just about changing our hiring practices or implementing new policies. This is about creating a culture where all of us, staff, patients, and community members, feel like they belong." The silence in the room was palpable. Sarah could see that the resistance was not going to dissipate overnight. But she also knew that this was the moment when leadership had to step up, not to back down but to keep pushing forward. She continued, her tone unwavering. "We cannot allow complacency to dictate our progress. We cannot ignore the reality that there are systemic biases at play here, whether we realize it or not. Our patients come from all walks of life, and they deserve a hospital that truly understands them, not just in terms of medical needs but in terms of the unique challenges they face. This is bigger than any one of us, and it's our responsibility to get it right." Greg, the director of HR who had initially expressed skepticism, leaned forward in his seat. "Sarah, I understand the need for change. But it's not just about policies and training. It's about our approach. We need to find a way to make these changes without alienating those of us who have been here for years." "I agree," Sarah said, meeting his gaze. "But the truth is, we can't afford to move at the pace of those who are resistant. We have to move forward. The longer we wait, the longer we perpetuate the problems we're trying to fix." As the meeting continued, Sarah could see that some of the staff were beginning to understand the urgency of the situation. There was still doubt, but the seeds of change were being planted. In the weeks that followed, more conversations took place, and while not everyone was immediately on board, there was a slow but steady shift in attitudes. The notion of accountability, of personal responsibility, started to resonate with many. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when frustration flared, but Sarah was determined to stay the course. Meanwhile, Musk continued to offer his support from the sidelines. His role wasn't always front and center, but his influence was undeniably powerful. The hospital's leadership team, under Sarah's guidance, had begun to shift its focus from merely checking off diversity initiatives to genuinely embedding inclusion into the fabric of their work. Musk had encouraged Sarah to take risks, to push boundaries, and to confront uncomfortable truths. It was advice that Sarah took to heart. One of the more notable moments in the hospital's transformation came when they launched a series of community outreach programs. These initiatives were designed not only to provide medical care to underserved populations but also to educate and empower them. The goal was to break down the barriers between the hospital and the community, to show that they were committed to meeting the needs of all people, regardless of their background. The first of these outreach programs was an informational session held at a local community center. The turnout was much larger than expected, and Sarah was struck by how many people had come, eager to learn about the resources the hospital was offering. It was clear that the community felt a sense of distance from the hospital, something that had been cultivated over the years by previous administrations. As the session unfolded, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. She had always been driven, but now there was a sense of urgency that fueled her every move. She knew that they were building something important, something that would last, but she also understood that the work would never truly be finished. There would always be more to do, more challenges to overcome. But in that moment, standing before a group of eager community members, Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. It was a reminder of why she had taken this job in the first place, to make a difference, not just for the patients, but for the entire community. And as the session concluded, with people leaving the room eager to take part in the hospital's new initiatives, Sarah couldn't help but feel hopeful. She turned to Lisa, her trusted director, who had been by her side throughout the entire process. "This is just the beginning," Sarah said, her voice filled with determination. "We've still got a long way to go, but we're on the right path." Lisa smiled, a rare moment of optimism breaking through the often tense atmosphere. "You're right. We've made it this far, and I believe we can make it all the way." But even as Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, she knew that there would be many more hurdles to face. The hospital's transformation had only just begun. There would be more resistance, more moments of doubt, and more tough decisions. But Sarah was ready for them. She had committed herself to this mission, and she wasn't about to back down now. As the days went by, the hospital's culture began to change in ways that were both tangible and subtle. More staff members from diverse backgrounds were promoted, and patient satisfaction scores began to rise. The community outreach programs gained momentum, and word began to spread that this hospital was no longer just a place of care. It was a place of progress, of inclusion, and of accountability. Sarah's leadership had been tested in ways she hadn't imagined when she first started, but now, as she watched the hospital evolve, she understood that true leadership wasn't just about making decisions. It was about fostering growth, resilience, and transformation. It was about leading by example, even when the path wasn't clear. And though there were still challenges ahead, Sarah knew that the hospital had turned a corner. The work wasn't over, but the future had never looked brighter. As Sarah stood at the head of the hospital, she was aware of the deep sense of responsibility she carried. The changes they had made were still in their infancy, but the foundations were solid. Yet, it wasn't enough to rest on the progress they had achieved. They needed to keep pushing forward, and with that came the pressure to succeed. But the landscape of healthcare, and more specifically, the culture of this hospital, was shifting at an unprecedented rate. One of the more contentious aspects of the transformation was the push for greater accountability. While many embraced the idea, others found it uncomfortable. Accountability, particularly in an institution as ingrained as this one, required an honesty that wasn't always welcome. People had been accustomed to operating with a certain level of leniency, where failure was brushed aside and biases were allowed to thrive. It wasn't that people were malicious. It was just the system that had been in place for so long. Now, with Sarah at the helm, there was no turning back. The first significant step toward deeper accountability came with the implementation of regular performance reviews that went beyond the typical job assessment. The hospital's leadership wanted to measure not only job performance but also individual efforts toward fostering inclusion, understanding, and empathy in their work. This was new territory, and some felt the intrusion into their personal practices was too much. But Sarah knew this was the only way to ensure the cultural shift would take root in every department. "I know this isn't easy for everyone," Sarah said in a meeting with department heads. "But the goal isn't to judge you, it's to encourage growth. To help us all become better at what we do, not just as professionals, but as human beings. We're all here for the same purpose, to serve our patients and make this hospital a place where everyone feels respected." The room was quiet as the department heads processed her words. Some of them were skeptical, but there were also those who saw the bigger picture. They understood that it was about changing the mindset of the entire organization, and that could only happen through personal responsibility. It wasn't about singling people out, it was about embracing the difficult conversations that would eventually lead to lasting change. The next challenge came when Sarah and Elon decided to take the next step in addressing the issue of prejudice and exclusion within the hospital's hiring practices. The old system had reinforced a certain status quo, where favoritism and unconscious bias often dictated who got hired or promoted. But they couldn't just announce a change and expect things to magically improve. It required ongoing effort, from revising job descriptions to ensuring that diverse candidates were being given fair consideration for positions across all levels. The first hire under the new system was a pivotal moment. The candidate, an African-American woman named Rachel, had been passed over for promotion in the past due to the unconscious biases of a few influential people within the hospital. But Sarah had seen her potential and fought for Rachel to be hired as the new head of a critical department. There were murmurs of discontent when the announcement was made, with some staff members questioning her qualifications based on outdated perceptions. But Rachel proved them wrong within weeks, quickly becoming one of the most admired leaders in the hospital. Her leadership style was not only efficient but also rooted in empathy and respect for everyone on her team, regardless of their background. Her success was a testament to the importance of diversity and inclusion in leadership positions. It was clear that when given the opportunity, people from diverse backgrounds brought new perspectives and solutions that were not only beneficial but transformative. And Sarah couldn't help but feel proud of the team they were building. Every step forward was a reminder of how much progress had been made, but also how much more was still to be done. Elon had been a quiet yet powerful ally in these efforts. His vision for the hospital wasn't just about cutting-edge technology or better facilities. It was about creating a space where people were treated with dignity, no matter their background. He was committed to the cause, offering resources and strategic insights, but he knew the real work was happening on the ground. Sarah's leadership was critical to the hospital's success, and he trusted her to keep pushing the boundaries of what was possible. As the hospital's reputation for inclusivity grew, so did the community's perception of it. Word spread that the facility wasn't just treating physical ailments, it was fostering an environment where emotional, cultural, and psychological well-being were equally prioritized. The integration of diversity training, staff mentorship programs, and open conversations about prejudice and discrimination created a culture of openness and growth. But there were still those who resisted the changes, and Sarah knew that true transformation required continuous vigilance. One of the most difficult conversations Sarah had to have came when an incident occurred involving one of the hospital's longtime employees, a nurse named Joan. Joan had been caught making a derogatory remark to a patient of color, a comment that was in direct violation of the hospital's newly implemented policies on respect and inclusivity. Joan's actions were troubling, not only because of the harm caused but also because it revealed that despite the changes, some people were not fully embracing the hospital's new ethos. The decision to address Joan's behavior was not easy. She had been with the hospital for decades and had built strong relationships with many of the staff. But Sarah knew that ignoring the issue would only undermine everything they were trying to accomplish. So, she called Joan into her office. "Joan, we need to talk about what happened," Sarah said calmly but firmly. Joan looked uncomfortable but didn't deny what had occurred. "I didn't mean any harm," she protested. "I know you didn't mean harm, but that's not enough," Sarah responded. "We have policies in place now, not just to protect the patients but to ensure that everyone here feels valued. When someone, no matter their position, makes a comment like that, it sends the wrong message to everyone. We're in a position of leadership. We have a responsibility to do better." Joan's eyes dropped to the floor, and for the first time, Sarah saw genuine remorse. It wasn't that Joan was inherently prejudiced, it was that she had been raised in a different time, with different values. The world was changing, and Joan had struggled to keep up. But Sarah wasn't about to let her off the hook. "We're going to implement a corrective action plan," Sarah continued. "I believe in your ability to change, but you need to demonstrate that you understand the harm you've caused and take concrete steps to improve." Joan nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I truly am. I don't want to be part of the problem. And that's why we're having this conversation," Sarah replied. "It's not about punishment, it's about growth. We all have room to improve, and we all make mistakes. But we need to own up to them and do the work to make sure they don't happen again." It was a turning point, not just for Joan but for the entire hospital. Sarah's approach was one rooted in empathy and understanding, yet it still held people accountable for their actions. This balance of compassion and responsibility became the hallmark of her leadership. By giving Joan a path toward redemption, Sarah reinforced the hospital's commitment to fairness, to second chances, and to the belief that everyone had the potential to change. The momentum Sarah had been building was palpable. The hospital was becoming a model of transformation, but the challenges were far from over. As the institution worked to embrace a new culture, it became apparent that the next phase of progress would require difficult decisions, especially when it came to financial investments and long-term sustainability. Elon, ever the visionary, had been instrumental in ensuring the hospital's future success, but the road ahead would require not only innovation but also tough compromises. The first major decision came with the implementation of new health technologies. The hospital had an opportunity to invest in cutting-edge equipment that would revolutionize patient care. However, these technologies came with a hefty price tag. The board, many of whom were more traditional in their approach, were initially hesitant. They had seen similar investments fail at other institutions, and they didn't want to risk the hospital's financial stability. Yet, Elon saw the potential benefits and pushed for the acquisition, not only because of the potential for improved patient care but because it could place the hospital at the forefront of medical advancements. He knew that these technologies were an investment in the hospital's future, and he had no intention of allowing short-term concerns to derail their long-term success. Sarah, too, believed in the potential of these technologies. She understood that change wasn't just about adjusting the culture, it was about keeping up with the rapidly evolving healthcare landscape. Yet, she knew this wasn't just about technology. It was about the people who would be using it. They needed training, support, and guidance to integrate these advancements into their daily practices. The introduction of these tools wouldn't be enough if the hospital's staff wasn't equipped to use them effectively. The decision was ultimately made to proceed with the investment. It was a gamble, but one that they all felt was worth taking. In the weeks that followed, the hospital underwent a significant training overhaul. Workshops were held for all staff members, from nurses to administrators, on how to operate and utilize the new technologies. The goal was to ensure that everyone was on the same page and that the technology would not only improve patient care but also increase efficiency and reduce workloads. This was particularly important for staff who were already stretched thin, and Sarah knew it would take time for everyone to adapt. As expected, there were growing pains. Some staff members were initially resistant to the new tools, while others struggled to integrate them into their workflows. The complexity of the technology was daunting for those who were less tech-savvy, and there were moments when frustrations ran high. But Sarah remained firm in her belief that this was the way forward. She personally ensured that the training sessions were inclusive and patient, with clear explanations and hands-on experience. She was committed to ensuring that no one was left behind in the transition. Despite these challenges, the hospital soon began to see the positive effects of the new technologies. Patient care improved, as diagnoses became more accurate and treatment plans more tailored. The efficiency gains also allowed the hospital to treat more patients, with fewer administrative errors and delays. The investment was starting to pay off, but the journey wasn't over. In parallel, the hospital's efforts to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion continued to evolve. The leadership team had recognized that while their policies were strong, there was still a need for tangible, community-based outreach. This wasn't just about changing the hospital's internal culture, it was about transforming the way the hospital interacted with the world around it. They wanted to be a true reflection of the diverse community they served, and that meant making a concerted effort to engage with underserved populations. Sarah worked with the outreach department to create partnerships with local organizations that focused on providing healthcare to marginalized groups. The goal was to build relationships with people who may not have had access to quality care in the past, whether due to financial, social, or cultural barriers. By doing so, the hospital could demonstrate that their commitment to diversity and inclusion extended beyond just their hiring practices and into their interactions with the community. These efforts were met with a mix of enthusiasm and skepticism. Some members of the community were skeptical of the hospital's sudden interest in their needs. They had been let down by the healthcare system before and were understandably wary of promises that seemed too good to be true. But Sarah and her team were patient. They took the time to listen, to understand the unique challenges faced by different communities, and to work alongside them in developing solutions. This approach helped to slowly build trust, and over time, more individuals began to seek care at the hospital. The push for diversity and inclusion wasn't without its critics, however. Some staff members felt that the hospital was straying too far from its original mission. They argued that the hospital should focus on patient care and clinical excellence rather than trying to become a social justice leader. The tension between these two perspectives was palpable, and Sarah found herself navigating these conflicting interests on a daily basis. But she refused to back down. She understood that the hospital's true mission wasn't just about providing medical care. It was about creating a space where all people felt valued, regardless of their background. The heart of medicine wasn't just in the science. It was in the human connection, in showing empathy and understanding to those who came through the doors. And that was what she was trying to build, a hospital where the culture of care extended beyond just the patients and into the entire community. As the weeks turned into months, the hospital's reputation began to shift. The staff, initially hesitant, began to embrace the changes. They saw the results not only in their own day-to-day work but also in the improved satisfaction of patients. The message of inclusion, of equality, and of leadership was beginning to take root. The leadership team had proven that transformation wasn't just a buzzword, it was a way of life. The hospital's success, however, wasn't just measured by its growth or the success of its programs. It was in the small, everyday moments, the interactions between staff and patients, the conversations between colleagues, and the way everyone came together to support one another. It was in the resilience of those who had been with the hospital for years, who had witnessed its transformation and stood by Sarah as she led it into a new era. Sarah had come to realize that leadership wasn't about being the person with all the answers. It was about being the person who could guide others toward solutions. It was about fostering a culture of mentorship, where those with experience shared their wisdom with others, and where new ideas were welcomed and encouraged. It was about creating an environment where people could grow, not just professionally, but personally. In many ways, Sarah saw herself as a mentor to her staff. She had been where they were, struggling to navigate a changing world, and now she was helping them do the same. She watched with pride as individuals took ownership of their own growth, as they stepped up to the plate and demonstrated the leadership that had once seemed out of reach. The hospital was no longer just a place of healing, it had become a beacon of hope, of change, and of possibility. It was a place where transformation wasn't just a concept, it was a living, breathing reality. And as Sarah looked ahead to the future, she knew that the work was far from over. There would always be challenges to face, but she was confident that with the leadership, dedication, and empathy of everyone at the hospital, they would continue to thrive. This wasn't just a hospital. It was a movement. And as the doors opened each day, Sarah felt the weight of the responsibility she carried, but she also felt the profound sense of pride that came with knowing she had helped lead it to a place where everyone, no matter their background or identity, could feel valued and cared for. And that, in the end, was the true legacy of their work. The hospital's transformation was undeniable, but it wasn't without its complexities. As Sarah continued to lead with the vision of equality and inclusion at its core, the challenges of maintaining balance became more evident. The weight of accountability rested heavily on her shoulders. The success of the initiatives, the embrace of new technology, and the outreach to underserved communities all relied on the commitment of her team. Sarah's leadership was tested daily. One of the most pressing issues was how to maintain the hospital's reputation while navigating the waters of public scrutiny. Elon had been an invaluable resource, often offering insights that helped steer the hospital toward long-term success. But with success came greater expectations. The community's demands for continued innovation, care, and accessibility were high. Every decision now felt like it carried more weight than ever before. There were those who saw the hospital's transformation as a shining example of how systems could evolve, but there were also critics who saw it as too much, too fast, too different. The balance was delicate, and Sarah knew that one misstep could undo all the work they had put into making the hospital a symbol of change. Despite the overwhelming pressure, Sarah remained unwavering in her belief that the hospital's mission was one of healing and inclusion. She held herself accountable not only to her staff but to the patients they served. She had witnessed the real impact of their work. Patients who once felt alienated by the healthcare system now walked into the hospital with a sense of dignity and hope. That was the measure of success for Sarah. It was the human element, the restoration of trust and compassion, that mattered most. But the path forward wasn't clear-cut. As the hospital gained recognition for its commitment to diversity, there were inevitable growing pains. The struggle for full inclusion wasn't over, and Sarah was aware of the need for continued vigilance. Some staff members were uncomfortable with the cultural shift, still holding on to outdated notions of professionalism that were at odds with the hospital's new direction. Sarah had made strides in addressing these concerns, but it was an ongoing process. There were moments when she felt a deep sense of frustration, when individuals resisted the change or when systems proved to be more ingrained in their biases than she'd anticipated. But each time, she returned to her vision. Sarah knew that the hospital had the potential to be a leader in changing not just healthcare but society at large. The challenge was not in transforming the hospital, but in transforming mindsets. Elon, despite his often direct approach, proved to be a staunch ally in these moments. He recognized the urgency of the situation and pushed Sarah to keep pushing forward. It wasn't just about the hospital's success, it was about the legacy they were creating together. The culture of accountability and empathy was not only important, it was necessary for the hospital's future. With Elon's guidance, Sarah had learned the power of leadership that combined empathy with action, vision with accountability. It wasn't enough to have the right ideas, one had to follow through with concrete, measurable changes. And so, they pushed on, with Elon's support allowing Sarah to make bold choices. In the midst of continued resistance from some staff members, Sarah forged partnerships with organizations outside the hospital. These partnerships were vital in extending the hospital's impact. She worked with advocacy groups, diversity consultants, and social justice organizations, all of whom saw the hospital as a model for change. Sarah believed that by collaborating with these outside forces, the hospital could continue to grow and evolve, incorporating fresh perspectives that could challenge its leadership to be more inclusive and effective. Through these partnerships, Sarah's role expanded beyond the hospital's walls. She became a vocal advocate for healthcare reform, speaking at conferences, participating in roundtable discussions, and working with legislators to address systemic inequities in healthcare. As much as the hospital was a beacon of change, Sarah understood that true transformation required a broader cultural shift. But the personal toll of this responsibility wasn't lost on her. Long hours, difficult decisions, and the constant pressure to succeed began to wear on her. She often found herself questioning whether the weight of her role was worth the toll it was taking on her well-being. Yet, every time she felt overwhelmed, she thought of the patients, the faces of those who had come through the doors, who had benefited from the hospital's changes. It was their stories that kept her going. The woman who had once felt ashamed to seek medical care, now smiling as she left with a prescription for not only physical healing but emotional wellness. The child whose family had once been turned away from care, now thriving in the hospital's compassionate environment. Each of these stories was a reminder of why she fought so hard. Every victory, big or small, reaffirmed the direction they were heading in. But Sarah knew that sustaining this momentum required more than just passion, it required resilience. As the hospital entered its second year of transformation, Sarah initiated the first of many mentorship programs. She understood that for the culture to truly change, future generations of healthcare professionals had to be equipped with the mindset and tools to continue the work. The mentorship program paired younger staff members with seasoned veterans, creating a framework for knowledge transfer that would not only strengthen the hospital's leadership but also ensure that diversity and inclusion remained at the heart of its operations. The first group of ments, eager to learn but unsure of the challenges they would face, was paired with senior staff who had seen the hospital's growth firsthand. The veteran mentors, many of whom had been with the hospital for decades, found themselves challenged by the younger generation's different perspectives. These new staff members questioned the status quo, demanding more from the hospital in terms of how it interacted with its community, its patients, and its employees. They weren't content to simply follow tradition, they wanted to reshape it. And in this, Sarah saw the hospital's future. Through these mentorship relationships, the hospital's culture continued to evolve. The staff was no longer a group of individuals working under a single vision. They were a collective force, each person contributing to the hospital's story. And, as more young people joined the fold, the momentum of change only intensified. But this success wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, it was uncomfortable, and it was ongoing. There would always be setbacks, always be people resistant to change, always be moments where the hospital's values would be tested. But Sarah had learned the importance of forgiveness, both of herself and others. The journey was not a straight line, and there would be times when she faltered, when the weight of leadership became too heavy. But she knew she wasn't alone. She had a team that was as committed to the hospital's mission as she was, and together, they would continue to lead the way forward. The hospital had become a symbol, not just of healthcare innovation, but of resilience. It stood as a testament to what could be achieved when a group of people came together, united by a shared vision of transformation, inclusion, and empathy. And as Sarah looked to the future, she saw that the real legacy of their work would not be found in the technology they had implemented or the policies they had created. It would be found in the lasting impact they had on the lives of the people they served, the patients, the staff, the community, and the generations that would follow.